Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, I want to take you to a very specific place. It's not a happy place, necessarily, but it is an intensely beautiful one.
I like that framing.
Imagine, if you will, a library, but not the kind with beanbags and, reliable Wi-Fi.
No. We are picturing a freezing cold, high-ceilinged room in a stone palace. We're in the early 1800s, and the air is just thick with dust and the smell of old paper.
And inside this library is a prisoner.
Prisoner who is also the warden, in a sense, a self-imposed sentence almost.
Right, and this prisoner is a young boy, and he is physically broken. And I don't mean just a little frail. I'm talking about a guy who becomes a hunchback, who can barely see, who lives in constant pain.
Yeah, debilitating pain.
He almost never leaves his small, suffocating provincial town, and yet this man, Giacomo Leopardi, possesses a mind that is currently roaming the cosmos, dismantling every single illusion that human beings use to get out of bed in the morning.
It's just such a striking paradox, isn't it? You have this extreme physical constraint, a life lived in, a few square meters in what were then the Papal States, contrasted with an intellectual boundlessness that is, frankly, well, it's terrifying.
We are talking about Giacomo Leopardi. Now, if you're Italian, you probably just had a visceral flashback to high school, memorizing his poems and maybe rolling your eyes at his gloominess.
Oh, for sure. He's required reading.
But if you aren't Italian, you might never have heard of him. And that's a shame, because he is often called the father of modern nihilism. He's the guy who looked at the universe and said, it doesn't care about you at all.
Which, on the surface, sounds like the most depressing topic we could possibly choose for a deep dive. Hey, everyone, tune in to hear why existence is futile.
I know, right? It's a hard sell. But here is the hook, the mission, if you will, for this exploration. We want to understand why reading Leopardi, despite his reputation as the absolute king of gloom, doesn't actually feel depressing.
No, it doesn't.
It feels strangely life-affirming, deeply human. We're going to dig into his massive notebook, the Zibaldone, his major poems, the Canti, his philosophical dialogues, the operette morale, and his life story to understand this whole concept of cosmic pessimism.
And we'll see why thinkers like Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and even Samuel Beckett later looked back at this frail Italian man and said, okay, he got it. He understood the fundamental problem of existence before any of us really did.
So let's set the scene. We are in Recanati. It's a hilltop town in the Marche region of Italy. At the time, early 1800s, this isn't exactly a booming metropolis.
No, and context is everything here. Recanati was part of the Papal States. This wasn't the Italy of the Renaissance or the Risorgimento that was just around the corner. It was a stifling, conservative, reactionary environment.
So the church is in charge, basically.
The church is in charge, and the mood is very much anti-enlightenment.
Yeah.
The revolutions in France and America, the focus on reason. Recanati was trying very, very hard to pretend the last 100 years just hadn't happened.
And sitting at the top of this stifling town is the Piazza Leopardi. This is where Giacomo was born in 1798. And if you think your family holidays are tense, wait until you meet the Leopardis. Let's start with the father, Count Monaldo.
Count Monaldo is a fascinating contradiction. He was a nobleman, a committed reactionary who absolutely hated the French Revolution, hated the very idea of progress, and he just wanted the world to stay anchored in traditional feudal values.
A real traditionalist.
A die-hard traditionalist. He once wore a sword in public just to make a point about how things used to be, but he loved literature.
He loved books so much, he basically bankrupted the family buying them. He built this massive, famous library in the house. It had something like 20,000 volumes.
Which was an enormous private collection for the time. It became Giacomo's entire world.
Yeah.
But then you have the mother, Marchioness Adelaide and Ticimate, and if Monaldo was the book-loving dreamer, Adelaide was the iron fist.
The sources describe her as cold and authoritarian, and honestly, that might be an understatement.
It really might, because Monaldo had squandered the family fortune not just on books, but also on gambling. She took over the management of the entire estate, and her one single-minded obsession was restoring the family wealth and reputation.
There's this detail in the biographies that she imposed a rigorous discipline of religion and economy. It just doesn't sound like a warm, fuzzy home. It sounds like a place of rules.
It was a place of extreme austerity. She was deeply religious, but in a severe, almost punitive way. There's a really chilling detail where she is described as envying parents whose children died young.
Envying them. Why?
Because those children went straight to heaven without having the chance to sin. She viewed life on earth essentially as a risk management problem for the soul. The less time you spent here, the less chance you had to mess up and go to hell.
That is, wow. Okay, so you have a home ruled by a father who retreats into the past, into his books, and a mother who runs the present like a prison warden, obsessed with balancing the books.
Not just the financial books, but the spiritual ones, too.
And in the middle of this is young Giacomo.
Exactly. And where does a sensitive, brilliant child go in that environment? He goes to the one place where he has any kind of freedom. He climbs the ladder in his father's library.
This brings us to part one of our story, the cage and the mad and desperate studies.
This phrase, studimati e disperatissimi, is Leopardi's own description of his youth. We're talking about the years roughly between 1809 and 1816. He's a child prodigy, but prodigy feels too small a word. It doesn't capture the intensity of it.
And he was mostly self-taught, right? His parents didn't really guide this.
Effectively, yes, he had some tutors, local priests mostly, but he outpaced them so quickly by the time he was 10 or 12, they had nothing left to teach him, so he just sat in the library and read everything. And when I say everything, I mean he taught himself Latin, Greek, Hebrew, French, Spanish, and some English.
On his own.
On his own. In a cold room in Recanati.
And he wasn't just reading, he was producing. By age 14 or 15, he's writing a history of astronomy. He writes an essay on the popular errors of the ancients. I mean, these aren't like high school book reports. These are serious philological works.
Philology, the study of language and historical texts, that was his first obsession. He's translating ancient manuscripts, correcting errors in Latin texts that had stumped professional scholars for centuries. He is doing the work of a seasoned academic at Oxford or the Sorbonne, but he's a teenager.
It's unbelievable.
It's like his mind was a muscle, and he was working it out 16 hours a day, every day, for 7 years.
But let's talk about the cost of that. Because you can't just download that much data into a human brain, especially a developing one, without consequences. He calls them mad and desperate for a reason.
The physical toll was catastrophic, absolutely devastating. Imagine a growing boy sitting hunched over parchment by candlelight for 7 years, barely moving, barely eating, just reading and writing. His health completely collapsed.
This is when the spinal deformity develops.
Yes. The sources suggest it was likely Pott's disease, which is a form of tuberculosis affecting the spine, or possibly ankylosing spondylitis. Whatever the specific diagnosis, the result was a severe curvature. He became a hunchback.
And it stunted his growth.
Yes. He stopped growing. He was only about 4 foot 8 inches tall as an adult. His eyesight began to fail from the constant strain of reading tiny print in bad light. He developed chronic gastrointestinal problems. It's so important to sit with this image. He is a teenager with the mind of genius, trapped in a body that is visibly deformed and constantly excruciatingly painful.
And his father, Rinaldo, he was proud of this, wasn't he, in a way?
In the worst possible way. He didn't seem to see the cost. He would hold public exams to show off Giacomo like a circus pony. Look at my brilliant son. He can translate Hebrew on the spot. But he completely ignored the fact that the mad studies were destroying the boy.
It's heartbreaking. Giacomo writes about looking out the library window at the village kids playing in the square and feeling like a ghost haunting his own life.
That isolation is key. He wasn't just lonely in a social sense. He was severed from normal human experience. He never had a childhood.
Which probably explains why he tried to escape in 1818, right?
He did. It was a pretty pathetic attempt, honestly. He planned a runaway attempt at age 20. He managed to secretly obtain a passport. He wrote a letter to his father explaining why he had to leave, but Rinaldo found out.
And he was caught.
He was caught! It's a humiliating moment. Here's a man who is intellectually miles ahead of his parents. He's already corresponding with some of the top minds in Europe. But in his own house, he's treated like a naughty child who tried to steal a cookie. His father literally intercepts him.
But you mentioned he was corresponding with people. There was a friendship that started around this time that was just crucial for him.
Yes, Pietro Giordani, a very important figure. He was a famous classicist and writer who visited the Leopardi estate in 1817. And Giordani was the first person to look at Giacomo and see a peer. Not a freak, not a child prodigy, but an intellectual equal.
That must have been like oxygen to him.
It was a lifeline. Giordani told him, "You are brilliant. There is a whole world out there waiting for you. You can't stay in Recanati forever." He offered him hope.
But that hope has a dark side, doesn't it?
It does, because ironically, it also made the cage feel smaller. Once you know what's outside, the walls feel that much closer. And right around this time, roughly 1816 to 1819, Leopardi undergoes this massive internal change. Scholars call it the shift.
So previously he was doing this philology, studying words, history, facts. He was an erudite. What happens in the shift?
He moves from erudition to beauty. He stops being just a scholar of ancient texts and decides to become what he was always meant to be, a poet. But it's not just a career change, it's a profound spiritual crisis.
Because he loses his faith, right? The rigid Catholicism of his mother.
Completely. He abandons it. He starts looking at the world through a much colder, more scientific, materialistic lens, heavily influenced by empiricist philosophers like John Locke. He starts looking for comfort in faith and starts staring at what he calls the arid truth, la ruda vero.
The arid truth. But, and this is the weird part, the beautiful paradox. This is also when he writes one of the most sublime poems ever written, L'Infinito, the infinite.
Written around 1819. It is a tiny poem, just 15 lines in the original Italian, but it contains the seed of his entire philosophy. It's a universe in a grain of sand.
Let's visualize it for the listener because the setting is so important. The speaker is sitting on a solitary hill in Recanati. It's a real place, Mount Tabor. He's looking out at the view, but there is a hedge, a simple row of bushes blocking the horizon.
Now hold on, most of us, if we went to a scenic viewpoint and there was a hedge blocking the view, we'd be annoyed. We'd try to find a better spot, right?
Yeah, I'd move.
Leopardi does something brilliant here. He says that the hedge is essential because it blocks his physical sight, it forces his mind to work, it forces him to imagine.
He writes, but sitting and watching, I imagine in my thought, spaces without limits.
Exactly. If he could see the actual horizon, it would be a specific, finite landscape. It would end somewhere. But because he can't see it, he constructs the infinite in his head. The infinite isn't a real place. It's a mental construct born from limitation.
So the limitation, the hedge, is what triggers the imagination.
It's the catalyst. And then the wind picks up. He hears the wind rustling in the leaves nearby, and he compares that finite present sound to the infinite silence of eternity, of past and future ages.
And the clash between the finite sound of the wind and the imagined infinite silence of eternity just overwhelms him. But he loves it, the famous last lines. And shipwreck seems sweet to me in this sea. Il naufragar m'è dolce in questo mare.
The sweet shipwreck. It's the dissolution of the self, the ego. For a brief, blissful moment, the pain of being Giacomo Leopardi, the hunchback, the prisoner, the lonely young man disappears. It's annihilated in the vastness of his own imagination. It's a moment of transcendence achieved not through faith, but through poetry.
This connects directly to his theory of pleasure, doesn't it? We need to unpack this because I feel like this is the engine of his whole worldview.
It absolutely is. And to understand it, we have to look at the Zibaldone.
The Zibaldone. Let's pause and explain what this thing is because notebook doesn't quite do it justice.
No, notebook is way too small a word. The Zibaldone is a monster. It's over 4,500 handwritten pages kept from 1817 to 1832. The word means hodgepodge or a mixture of things in Italian, and that's exactly what it is.
It's his intellectual laboratory.
Perfect description. He wrote about everything: philosophy, linguistics, astronomy, literary criticism, anthropology, personal memories, cynical aphorisms. It's all in there. It wasn't meant for publication. It was him thinking on paper for 15 years.
It's like if you printed out the internet history of a depressed genius for 15 years.
A genius who is incredibly, incredibly sharp. And in these thousands of pages, he works out his theory of pleasure. Here's the core idea, and it's deceptively simple. Leopardi argues that the human mind is structurally designed to desire infinite satisfaction.
Infinite, as in limitless.
Infinite, limitless, undefined, perpetual happiness. That is our default setting. But we live in a physical, finite world, and the physical world only offers finite things.
Okay, let's use an example. I desire a new car.
Right.
A perfect, shiny new car.
Right. You desire the car. And in your head, before you get it, the idea of the car represents a huge, vague, potentially infinite happiness. It's shiny, it smells new, it will change your life, people will admire you. That desire is enormous.
Okay.
Then you buy the car.
And for 3 days, I love it. It's amazing.
And on day 4...
It's just my car. And I have to get gas, and I'm worried about scratching it.
The object itself is finite. It has limits. It gets dirty. But your desire for happiness was infinite. So the moment you actually possess the thing, the gap between what you wanted and what you got becomes painfully obvious. Leopardi calls this feeling noia. Not just boredom, but a deep existential tedium.
So we are structurally doomed to be unsatisfied because we want more than reality can physically provide.
Correct. Reality is small. Desire is huge. That is the fundamental tragedy of human consciousness.
So what's the solution? I mean, how do we not go completely crazy?
Illusions. Distance. Vagueness. This is where the hedge from L'Infinito comes back. If a thing is far away or hidden or indistinct or in the future, we can project our infinite desire onto it because we can't see its disappointing, finite edges yet.
This is why anticipation is almost always better than the event itself.
Always. This is why he loved the ancients, the Greeks and Romans. He had this whole theory that they were happier than us.
Why? Because they had better stuff?
No, because they had better illusions. They had myths. They looked at a forest and saw dryads in the trees. They looked at the sea and saw Poseidon. Their world was enchanted by imagination. They didn't know everything.
And us, moderns.
We are cursed with reason. Larido vero, the arid truth. We have analyzed the world to death. We know the dryad isn't there. It's just chlorophyll and bark and photosynthesis. We've stripped the world of the very illusions that made life bearable.
That is actually a really powerful way to look at it. It explains why a world of total information where everything is known is kind of a bummer.
Truth is the enemy of happiness. That is a core Leopardi tenet. And beauty, for him, is almost always linked to the vague, the indefinite, the remembered, or the anticipated.
So, initially in this early phase of his philosophy, he sees nature as kind of benevolent. She's a mother who gave us these illusions to hide the ugly truth. Here, have a myth about Zeus so you don't worry about the abyss of death.
Precisely. He calls this his historical pessimism phase. He thinks, I am unhappy because I am modern. If I had been born in Sparta in 500 BC, I would have been happier because I would have had more illusions.
But I have a feeling that doesn't last.
No, that blanket is about to get ripped away. As we move into part 3 of our deep dive, he moves from historical pessimism to something much darker. Cosmic pessimism.
And nature stops being the nice mom who tells you bedtime stories.
She becomes a monster. Or worse, a machine that doesn't care if it grinds you up in its gears.
This shift is perfectly captured in his work, Opera Immorale, or Small Moral Works. These are these brilliant, strange prose dialogues. And there's this one story in particular, the dialogue of nature and an Icelander.
This is a key text written in 1824. Imagine a man from Iceland. He spends his entire life trying to avoid suffering. He's not asking for much. He's not chasing infinite pleasure. He just doesn't want to be in pain.
He's the ultimate risk-averse traveler.
Totally. He runs from volcanoes in Iceland. He runs from storms at sea. He runs from the cold. He figures, I'll go somewhere else where nature is kinder. He travels all over the world.
And where does he end up?
He travels to the interior of Africa to escape nature's wrath. And there, in the middle of a vast desert, he sees a giant bust, like a huge, terrifying statue that turns out to be a giant woman. It is nature personified.
And he finally gets to ask the manager a question.
He gets his chance. He unloads on her. He says, why? Why do you torment us? Why did you create us if we're just going to suffer? I didn't do anything to you. Why do you hate me so much? And nature's response is just absolutely chilling. She basically yawns. She says, did you think I did this for you? Ouch.
It's a brutal takedown of human self-importance. She explains that the universe is a perpetual cycle of production and destruction. Life, suffering, and death are just necessary parts of the engine. She says, and this is a paraphrase, the world is not made for humanity. If destroying the whole human race would benefit the universal cycle, I would do it without a second thought.
So it's not that she hates him.
No, that would almost be comforting. Hate implies a relationship. She is completely, utterly indifferent. He is an ant on a sidewalk. His happiness, his suffering, is all completely irrelevant to the grand mechanical process.
That is cosmic pessimism. It's not about history or culture or your personal health. It's about the fundamental mechanics of the universe.
And to prove the point, the dialogue has this slapstick, horrifying ending, just as the Icelander is processing this, that his entire life of suffering means absolutely nothing. What happens?
2 famished lions show up.
2 famished lions show up and eat him. And the narrator notes, with this cold, scientific precision, that the lions, having eaten him, were able to live a little bit longer that day.
Shay is so dark.
It's brutal irony. Or there's an alternative ending that Leopardi wrote where a sandstorm buries him and he becomes a perfectly preserved mummy who ends up in a museum in Europe. Either way, he is consumed by the system. He becomes an object.
So this is where we move from I am unhappy because I am sick, which is, personal pessimism,
Right.
to we are unhappy because we are modern, which is historical pessimism,
Yeah.
to the final awful stage. Everyone and everything is unhappy simply because it is born.
Correct. Existence itself is a flaw. Leopardi argues that unhappiness is the default state of all living things. Animals, he thinks, suffer less only because they don't have the consciousness to reflect on the past or worry about the future. They just exist in the moment. We have the curse of thinking about our own suffering.
Okay, hold on. I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. Isn't this just teenage angst elevated to a grand philosophy? I didn't ask to be born. Life sucks. It sounds like something a goth kid writes in their journal. Is it really deeper than that?
That is the most common criticism. For 100 years, people dismissed him as exactly that. The bitter hunchback who hated life because he couldn't get a date. They said, oh, if he'd been handsome and healthy, he would have been an optimist.
Right. Fix the back, fix the philosophy.
But Leopardi anticipated that critique. He wrote about it in Zibaldone. He argued that his physical suffering didn't create the truth, it just stripped away the illusions that healthy people use to blind themselves to it. He said, my sickness acted like a magnifying glass.
So you say his pain gave him clarity.
Exactly. He believed that even if he were the most handsome, successful, wealthy man in Italy, the theory of pleasure would still hold. He would still get bored, he would still get old, he would still die. The void is there for everyone. He just didn't have the energy or the distractions to look away from it.
That's a fair counterpoint. He's saying, I'm not the pessimist. You guys are just delusional.
Pretty much. And he's got a point.
So he takes this leaden, heavy philosophy, and somehow, in part 4 of our story, he transmutes it into pure gold. We're talking about the great Canti, his major poems written in his maturity.
This is the period roughly between 1823 and 1832. He actually manages to leave Recanati for a while. He goes to Florence, Pisa, Bologna, but the world often disappoints him. It's not the magical place he read about in books. And eventually, due to worsening illness and lack of money, he has to go back to the cage of his father's house.
But the poetry he writes in this period, it's not angry or bitter. It's heartbreakingly gentle and full of memory. Let's talk about A Sylvia to Sylvia.
A Sylvia, written in 1828, it's one of the most famous poems in the Italian language, for good reason. Sylvia is likely based on a real person, Teresa Fattorini, the daughter of the Leopardi family's coachman. She died of tuberculosis in her late teens.
In the poem, Leopardi remembers her singing at her loom when they were both young. She represents hope and youth itself.
But notice what the central tragedy is here. It isn't just that she died. That's sad, of course. But the real tragedy for Leopardi is that she died before she lost her illusions.
He talks about the appearance of truth, before the arid truth could show itself.
Right. Sylvia died while she still believed the future would be wonderful. She died in the springtime of her life, full of anticipation. Leopardi survived. He grew up. He lived long enough to learn the truth that life is suffering and disappointment. In a way, he envies her, but he also mourns the fact that nature creates such beautiful potential only to destroy it. He asks nature, why do you not keep what you promised?
But he knows the answer by now. Nature never promised anything in the first place. We just thought she did.
Exactly. It's a poem about the death of hope, both hers and his.
Then there's Il Sabato del Villaggio, Saturday in the Village. This one resonates with me so much because it feels so profoundly psychological.
It's a masterclass in observation and a perfect illustration of his theory of pleasure. He describes the village preparing for Sunday, the day of rest. The young girl comes back from the countryside with a bundle of flowers. The carpenter is hurrying to finish his work before the sun sets. Everyone is bustling and happy on Saturday evening. Why?
Because they are looking forward to the holiday. They're anticipating the rest, the pleasure.
Exactly. Saturday's a day of hope. But then Sunday comes, and what does Sunday bring?
Boredom and the dread of Monday morning.
Sunday is sad and tedious. The reality of the holiday never, ever matches the beautiful expectation of the holiday.
So takeaway is, the expectation of happiness is the only real happiness we ever actually get.
Pleasure is the son of misery, he writes elsewhere. The only real pleasure is the temporary absence of pain, or the anticipation of a future joy that will, by definition, disappoint you when it finally arrives.
Man, that hits hard. But the peak for me, the absolute heavy hitter in this period, is the Canto Notturno di un Pastore Errante dell'Asia, the night song of a wandering shepherd in Asia.
This is perhaps his most profound philosophical poem. He was inspired by a travelogue he read about Kyrgyz shepherds in the Asian steppe, who would sit alone with their flocks at night and, apparently, sing songs to the moon.
So he imagines a shepherd, alone in this vast, empty landscape. No Recanati, no library, no hedge, just earth and sky. And the shepherd is talking to the moon. He asks, "What do you do, moon, in the sky? Tell me, what do you do, silent moon?"
The moon here represents nature again, but notice the difference. It's not a giant, monstrous woman. It's The indifferent witness. The moon is immortal, it's silent, it wanders the same path forever, it doesn't suffer, it doesn't get bored, it just watches.
And the shepherd is mortal, tired, and full of questions. He asks the moon, if life is misfortune, why do we endure it? He compares the human life cycle to the life of the moon, and it just seems so pointless.
And then he looks down at his flock of sheep, and this is the crucial comparison. He envies the sheep.
Why does he envy the sheep?
He says, you rest in the shade and you are calm. I sit in the shade and I am filled with a spur with anxiety. The sheep doesn't know it exists in time. It doesn't know it's going to die. It feels hunger. It eats. It's happy. It feels tired. It sleeps. It's content. The man knows.
Consciousness is the curse.
Yes. The ability to ask why is the source of all our unhappiness.
And the conclusion the shepherd reaches after all this questioning.
It's devastatingly bleak. He wonders for a moment if maybe if he could fly like a bird or wander like the moon, he would be happy, but he catches himself. He says, perhaps my thought is wandering from the truth. He concludes that for every single being that is born, whether it's in a cradle or in a den, the day of birth is black. Giorno di nascita è funesto.
Birth itself is the tragedy.
Yes, it is the ultimate expression of that cosmic pessimism for man, for sheep, for everything that lives.
Now, you might think a guy who believes birth is a tragedy would just give up on all human connection. He'd just sit in a room and stare at the wall. But Leopardi didn't. He was desperate for love. This brings us to part 5. Love, death, and satire.
He fell in love constantly. He had this immense capacity for feeling, but it was almost always unrequited. His physical appearance, the hunchback, the shortness, the shabby clothes, made him feel totally undesirable, especially in the sophisticated salons he started to frequent.
There's a specific episode in Florence where he falls deeply in love with a woman named Fanny Targiani Tozzetti.
He calls her Aspasia in his poems, after the companion of Pericles. She was beautiful, charming, intelligent, socially active. She ran a salon where all the intellectuals gathered. And Leopardi just projected all his ideals onto her. He fell in love with a platonic ideal that he stuck onto Fanny's face.
And Fanny, how did she feel about him?
Fanny was polite. She was flattered. She liked having a famous genius in her salon, but she wasn't interested romantically at all. In fact, years later, she gave his autograph to someone as a souvenir, like a celebrity trinket. It's not clear she ever really understood she was the subject of some of the greatest love poetry in the Italian language.
So when the rejection finally hits him, when he realizes it's never going to happen, he writes a se stesso, to himself.
This poem is the crash. It is short, brutal, and final. He stops talking to the moon. He stops talking to Sylvia. He stops talking to women. He talks directly to his own heart.
He tells his heart to stop beating.
He says, "Rest forever, my tired heart. The last cheat is dead, the one I believed eternal."
The last cheat, l'ingano estremo, being love.
Yes. He thought love was the one exception to the rule of universal suffering. He thought love was the one thing that was real that could save him. Now he sees that even love is an illusion, a biological trick to keep the species going. He concludes with that famous line, "And the infinite vanity of the whole, l'infinita vanità del tutto."
Meaning everything is pointless.
Everything. The politics, the poetry, the struggle, the desire, it's all vanity. It's a declaration of emotional death.
But, and here's where it gets really interesting, he doesn't just wallow. After the crash, he gets angry. And he gets funny. Sarcastically funny.
People often forget Leopardi was a brilliant satirist. He wrote this very strange, very long poem called Per l'upomeni della batracomiomachia,
Which is a mouthful.
It translates to The Things Left Out of the War of the Frogs and Mice. It's a mock epic, a sequel to an ancient Greek parody of Homer.
Okay, so mice and crabs. Explain this to me, because this sounds like a fever dream.
You have to understand the political context of the 1830s. Italy is partly occupied by Austria. The Italian liberals, the revolutionaries of the Risorgimento, want to unite Italy and bring in a modern liberal democracy. Leopardi casts the liberals as mice.
Why mice?
Because they are noisy, they scurry around with big ideas, they are full of revolutionary fervor, but they are ultimately small, weak, and powerless against the crabs. The crabs represent the Austrians.
And why crabs?
Because they are armored, slow, they move sideways, and they are brutally effective. But here's the kicker. He isn't just making fun of the Austrian oppressors, he is mocking the mice, the Italian liberals, even more viciously.
Wait, isn't he Italian? Shouldn't he be on the side of the liberals?
You'd think so. Most romantics were. But Leopardi despised the naive optimism of the liberals. This was the 19th century, the century of progress with a capital P. People genuinely believed that steam engines, constitutions, democracy, and the printing press were going to solve human unhappiness forever. They thought they were building a utopia on Earth.
And Leopardi looks at all this excitement and says,
He says, "You are all delusional. Imagine you are on the Titanic and the ship has hit the iceberg. The water is rising. That is the human condition. Mortality, suffering, the indifference of nature. The mice are running around arguing about electing a new captain or rearranging the deck chairs. Leopardi is the guy standing in the corner screaming, 'The ship is sinking. Who cares about the chairs?'"
So he thought political progress was just another hedge, another illusion to distract us from the arid truth.
The biggest illusion of them all. He believed that even if you have a perfect democracy and a steam engine in every house, you are still going to get old, you are still going to die, and your heart is still going to be broken, and you are still going to be bored on a Sunday afternoon. A steam engine doesn't fill the void in the soul.
He despised the arrogance of his century.
He called it the century of tall tales. He thought it was smug and childish.
So he's dismantled religion, nature, love, and politics. He has stripped the house down to the bare studs. What on earth is left?
That brings us to the final chapter, the final stance. It's unexpected, and it's beautiful.
In the 1830s, Leopardi moves to Naples. He goes with his best friend, Antonio Ranieri.
We should spend a moment on Ranieri. He was a handsome, dashing, somewhat unreliable Neapolitan exile. But he became Leopardi's devoted caretaker and constant companion in his final years.
The sources mention there is some academic debate about the nature of this relationship.
There is. They lived together for 7 years. Ranieri's sister, Paolina, lived with them too, as a sort of chaperone. Leopardi wrote letters to Ranieri that are incredibly intimate, calling him my soul, my everything. Whether the relationship was sexual is debated by scholars and will likely never know for sure, but emotionally, Ranieri was the love of his life. He was the rock that allowed him to keep writing.
So they are in Naples. And Naples is noisy, chaotic, full of life, everything Leopardi usually hates. But they eventually move to a villa on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius.
Living on an active volcano, it is the perfect, most potent setting for his final philosophical stand.
And here, in 1836, shortly before he dies, he writes his poetic testament, La Ginestra, the Broom.
The broom refers to the Ginestra, a small, humble yellow flower that grows tenaciously on the solidified, barren lava fields of Vesuvius.
I love this image so much. You have the black, desolate, dead lava. That's the arid truth. That's destruction. That's indifferent nature. And then you have this tiny, stubborn, fragrant yellow flower just growing out of it.
And this flower becomes Leopardi's model for how human beings ought to live.
How so? Is it about hope? Is the flower a symbol of rebirth?
No. That would be too simple, too optimistic for him. It's about dignity. The flower isn't arrogant. It doesn't believe it's immortal or that it can defeat the volcano. It knows the lava could come back tomorrow and incinerate it. It doesn't beg the volcano for mercy, and it doesn't foolishly pretend the volcano isn't there. It just persists. It offers its sweet scent to the desert to console the lonely traveler.
And in this poem, Leopardi offers a solution to the problem of existence. And it's not God, and it's not progress. It's solidarity.
This is the social chain, and this is the most important part of the entire deep dive. He says, look, nature is our common enemy. The universe is indifferent and cruel. We are all soldiers in an army fighting a war against mortality that we are guaranteed to lose.
So why on earth are we fighting each other?
Exactly. If we are all on the same sinking ship, why are we stabbing each other over who gets the best cabin? He calls for a confederation of mankind. He says we must stop fighting each other, stop the wars, the nationalism, the petty conflicts, and band together. We must hold hands and comfort each other because there is no other help coming from the sky.
It's us against the volcano.
It is. It was what you could call a heroic pessimism. We fight the darkness not by pretending it's light, but by lighting a candle for the person standing next to us. It's an alliance of the victims against the executioner.
That is surprisingly warm and deeply moving for a guy who started with a man getting eaten by lions.
It is. It's a secular humanism born out of total despair. It's the radical idea that because life is fundamentally hard and tragic, kindness is the only rational response.
Leopardi dies the next year, 1837.
During a cholera epidemic in Naples, he was only 38 years old. His heart or his lungs, his fragile body finally just gave out. He likely died of pulmonary edema or heart failure.
And there's a final touching twist with his burial, isn't there?
Yes. Because of the cholera epidemic, there were strict public health laws. Bodies were being thrown unceremoniously into mass graves and covered in quicklime. But Ranieri, faithful Ranieri, fought the authorities. He likely bribed someone, hid the body, and pulled strings to get him a proper burial in a church crypt.
Saving him from the anonymity, the oblivion he feared so much.
Saving him from being consumed by the infinite vanity of the whole.
So let's bring this all home. We called this deep dive The Prisoner of the Library. But by the end, listening to you, he seems like the freest man in Europe.
I think that's right, in a way. He is the supreme interrogator. He stripped away every single comfortable illusion. He took away the comfort of religion, the comfort of progress, the comfort of romantic love. He showed us the bare, cold walls of the universe.
Which sounds absolutely terrifying.
It is, but there is a strange, profound dignity in it. He refused to lie to himself. And in the end, with La Ginestra, he found a way to be kind in a cruel world. He teaches us that we can look directly at the void and still choose to hug our friend.
So here's our final thought for you, the listener. Leopardi spent his entire life dismantling illusions. He called them hedges, things that block our view of the terrifying, incomprehensible infinite.
But he also admitted, especially in his early work, that without those hedges, without those illusions, we can't survive. Imagination needs limits.
We live in an age where we have torn down a lot of hedges. We have information overload. We see the arid truth on our screens every single day. We know too much about everything.
The question Leopardi leaves us with is this: can we live with the unvarnished truth? Or do we need to start consciously planting our own hedges? Do we need to cultivate limits, put down the phone, ignore the 24-hour news cycle, create a little mystery in our lives so that our minds have a space to imagine the infinite again?
Maybe the shipwreck is only sweet if you don't know exactly how deep and cold the water is.
Or maybe, as his final poem suggests, the sweetness comes from knowing the ship is going down and turning to hold the hand of the person next to you anyway.
Something to think about as you look at your own horizon. Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.
Goodbye, everyone.